Welcome back to Jennie Designs with Paper and this week's episode of Crime and Coloring, where we go on an alphabetical journey through the United States and revisit some of the earliest crimes. But before we talk crime, let's talk coloring. This week I am coloring this image. This was an MFT stamp collaboration with Tiddly Inks. I love Tiddly Inks drawings. They are fabulous. I am going to Copic color this girl using color combinations from this pattern paper. I have my Copic markers already selected. I will be stamping on Neenah Classic Crest Solar White 80-pound cardstock with Simon Says Stamp Intense Black ink because it is alcohol marker friendly. There's a couple times in the video where I had to find different color combinations because my markers are drying out. I need to spend a day cleaning and refilling all of my markers. It's getting to that point. So I think that's all about the coloring. Let's go ahead and jump into our crime. Our alphabetical journey today takes us to the state of Maryland. Now, the area of Maryland was part of the original territory to the United States, and it was chartered as a colony in 1632. However, some of the land granted in that charter was claimed by Virginia and Pennsylvania. The Virginia-Maryland border was settled when Virginia gave up the area. But the border dispute between Pennsylvania and Maryland was settled with the creation of the Mason-Dixon line in the 1760s. Maryland did ratify the U.S. Constitution on April 28, 1788, making it the seventh of the original 13 colonies to join the United States. And while Maryland was a slave state, they did not secede from the Union during the Civil War. Maryland is home to the first female licensed as a printer in the colonies. Her name was Diana Nuthead, and she was from St. Mary's City, and her printing company was operational in 1685. The Maryland Gazette was founded in 1727 and is the oldest continuously published newspaper in the United States. The first post office system in the United States was established in Baltimore, Maryland in 1774. In 1844, the first telegraph line in the world was established between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. Maryland has adopted the nickname of Little America because of its variety of topography in the state. They have sandy dunes and seagrass, they have marshland and wildlife, and they're up on the Chesapeake Bay. They have rolling hills and the forests of the Piedmont region. And they have pine trees in the mountains in the west. So they have a little bit of everything that the United States has. The Maryland State House building is the oldest state capitol still in continuous legislative use. And Maryland was the home of Henry Scott Gray, a man who was murdered, or was he? So Maryland was a hard state to find a good unsolved story about, and that's either because they solved other crimes or they kept horrible records, and I think it was probably more of the last. The only exception to that horrible record-keeping group was a group of records created in 1986 by the Baltimore City Archive Office, and that record listed all of the suspicious deaths in 1827, 1835 to 1860, 1864, and 1867. Our story today actually happens to fall after this time frame, but was found when an attorney's records were digitized for archival storage. So Henry Scott Gray was born about 1863. I do not have a birthday or date or month, just an approximate year, and his parents were William and Susanna Gray. Now, he lived with his family in Cecil County, Maryland, most of his life. He began his working life as a labor farmer like his father, but by 1898, he was earning a living as a barber in Conowingo, and that is where he lived with his wife and his children. He was also a member of the Junior Order of the United American Mechanics, or the Junior OUAM, and this was a fraternity or a fraternal organization similar to the Masons. Now, there was very little else written about Henry's life until the evening of April 9th, 1899. Henry ate dinner with his family and then fell ill afterwards. The illness progressed rapidly. It involved muscle spasms that increased in severity over time. One newspaper, the Hartford County Aegis, noted that a Dr. Reagan was summoned, but accounts differ on when he was called and when he got there. But apparently, by the time he did arrive at the Gray family home, Henry was dead. And at this time in Maryland, the necessity of a doctor signing a death certificate was only about a year old. That law was less than a year old. So this Dr. Reagan refused to sign the death certificate. I don't know what transpired. I could not find a record of that, but eventually he and one other doctor did sign the death certificate. So naturally, not long after the death, there began speculation on the death not being caused by natural causes, because Henry was only about 36 and presumably healthy. But the most vocal opposition to this not being a natural death came from members of the OUAM. You see, Henry had purchased a $300 insurance policy from the group, and the junior OUAM apparently decided to approach county authorities with their suspicions that Henry had in fact been poisoned. All right, let's talk about Henry's wife for a minute. Henry married a gal named Ella, whose family line I cannot trace. Ella Gray was born about 1861 and was about 2 years older than Henry. She was also a lifelong resident of Cecil County, and it seems like that when she was young, she lost her father. Now, the source that I read said she lost her father. I don't know if that means he died or he ran away or whatever, but she no longer had a father, which in the 1890s meant that she probably grew up in dire circumstances. In the 1880 census, she is found living with her mother and a 3-year-old daughter. Henry and Ella had 4 children, according to records, and at the time of Henry's illness and death, all 4 of the children were under 10 years old. So if this was 1899, they got married in 1889. So, yeah. On May 3rd, Ella was arrested for her husband's murder after what seemed to be no investigation by authorities at all. Like, the OUAM cried foul and insisted on an investigation, and then Ella was arrested. She was reportedly calm until she realized that she was going to be taken immediately to jail, at which time she became agitated. And that was more because 2 of her children were sick with the measles than the fact that she was being arrested, it seems. So after she found somebody to come in and care for her children, she was arrested and led away by authorities. Now, the fact that Henry had taken out a $300 insurance policy was public knowledge, at least among the junior OUAM. Also public knowledge was the rumor or speculation or whatever you want to call it, that the Grays' marriage was troubled and was reportedly based on jealousy. Now, I don't know who was jealous of who. Was Ella a pretty young woman that men liked to flirt with? Was Henry a skirt chaser? I don't know. That was just the rumor at the time. This information seemed to be all of the justification necessary to arrest Ella. And it seemed that members of the junior OUAM knew more about the family matters of the Gray family home than the average person would or should. And they used their local influence to force an investigation. But again, it didn't seem like there was any immediate result from that investigation. And so the OUAM kind of gave up pursuing the matter, and then Ella was arrested. So they tried to flex, it didn't seem to go anywhere, and then boom, Ella is arrested. And her arrest again was on May 3rd. So about a month after her husband's death. Now, what was unknown to the gentlemen of the junior OUAM was that authorities had been quietly investigating the circumstances to Henry's death on their own. The break in their case supposedly came when investigators discovered that Ella had purchased 6 grains of strychnine from Reagan Brothers drugstore 2 or 3 days before her husband's death. Grains was a measure of weight that they used then. Okay, no biggie. Sometime around May 4th, so again, about a month after Henry's death, his body was exhumed by the county health officer, a man named Officer Bratton. And several of his organs were removed and sent to a Dr. Lehman, a Baltimore City chemist, to be examined. Now, Ella Gray remained incarcerated until a bail hearing that was held on Saturday, July 1st. And while she was in jail, she retained a state senator who eventually became the governor of Maryland, a man named Austin Crowthers, and a man named Albert Constable Jr. as her legal counsel. Side note, Albert himself was a murder victim some years later. The state's attorney, a man named William Evans, called a whole slew of witnesses. He called William Reagan from the drugstore, Dr. Bratton, the county health officer, David Bentz, William Love, David Love, Dr. Reagan, William Gray, a person named B. Gray, Elliot Graham, Juanita Graham, C.P. Bartholomew, Beta Knight, and William Dempsey. There was no indication in the newspaper reports and such as to why each of these people had been called, with the exception of William Reagan from the drugstore, the county health officer, and Dr. Reagan, who signed the death certificate. Okay, everybody else, we don't know why they were called. We can assume that, at least presume, that some of them were members of the junior OUAM, and they were called to testify about the insurance policy and their knowledge of the family's financial status. Maybe they were called to testify to the rumors of their marital squabbles. Who knows? The list of witnesses for Ella were a man named William Gray, somebody listed as B. Gray, Dr. Roman, who was the other doctor who had signed Henry's death certificate, and Mrs. Mary Barrow, John White, and William Hickman. A much shorter list of witnesses for sure. So the individual testimony of the witnesses was not recorded in any of the newspapers that covered the hearing. However, the chemist's report was read by Dr. Bratton. So Dr. Lehman, the chemist that performed the tests on Henry's organs after the exhumation, found no evidence of strychnine in the stomach, heart, or kidneys. He did find a number of whole lima beans and other vegetables that appeared to have been swallowed without being chewed. The Middletown transcript reported, quote, Gray's death was said to be due to eating without masticating his food, end quote. So they are basically saying he died from not chewing each bite long enough before he swallowed it. Now, Judge Frederick Stump, who was presiding over the case, stated that the evidence was insufficient to continue to hold Ella. So he wanted her out of jail. He also stated that even if it went to trial and a jury chose to convict her on that evidence, he would refuse to pass sentence on her. He did not feel like there was enough substantial, unconflicting evidence to convince a reasonable person that she had poisoned her husband. So Ella was free to go. In the trial's aftermath, Ella Gray went back to her life, but with no husband to provide for her family. It was hard. And there was no insurance money. In spite of Judge Stump's ruling, the junior OUAM refused to honor the insurance claim. Ella and 3 of her daughters are found on the 1900 census still living in the Conowingo area. It was probably very difficult to live there. I'm sure there were people who thought she had gotten away with murder, and there were probably just as many people who thought she had an unfair shake in the whole thing, right? In 1910, she is still listed, or she is then listed in the Dublin area of Hartford County, right across the Susquehanna River from Conowingo. And she is still there in 1920, but after 1920, she does not appear on any census in the area. Like, I can't even find a record of her other than this report of her being married to Henry Scott Gray. So, in today's world, could the forensic evidence have detected anything different? Maybe. Were the tests performed in 1899 sufficient enough to detect poison in Henry's system? I think probably they were, because strychnine was a specific... Okay, so strychnine was used for the control of rats and rodents. But the death by strychnine in the 1800s had become such a popular way to cover up a murder that the distribution of strychnine was... what's the right word here? It wasn't controlled. Like, anybody could go to a drugstore and buy it. But anybody who bought strychnine, it was written down. It was wrote down who they were, when they bought it, and how much they bought. So, I don't know that she could not have secretly gotten strychnine somewhere else, is what I'm saying. But also, because of all of these deaths that were attributed to strychnine, the test for determining strychnine had become as good as they could be in 1899, right? So would our modern day forensics been able to detect anything different? I don't know. I guess for a minute, when you have a supposedly healthy man die suddenly, and there is a record of his wife having purchased strychnine, definitely it would cause suspicion, and be an autopsy or testing of organs would be necessary. Okay, so, but purchasing strychnine was not uncommon. Like, almost everybody had some. Now, I have a rather suspicious mind, and my mind went down the path of the junior OUAM not wanting to or not being able to pay the insurance policy. And in order to have a legal reason not to do that, they had to prove, or at least suggest, that Ella had killed Henry. They used whatever influence they had to try and spur the investigation. And then when Henry's remains did not show any strychnine in them, like they were tested for strychnine and there was none, and the judge said, there's no evidence. You don't have enough evidence. We cannot even try this woman. They still did not pay. The OUAM still did not pay out Henry's insurance policy. Now, I don't know. Did they not have the money? Maybe, but it seems like they just didn't want to. I don't know. I just kind of think that they are the reason that Ella was arrested, not the fact that she purchased strychnine. That was just way too common. And in all of this, there's no photos, except this. This is the picture of Henry's death card in the county morgue archives. That's it. Nothing else. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I know it was a rather short story. I have a couple of other videos here I think you would like. I've also added that subscribe button. Please subscribe if you have not. I would love it if you did. Leave me a comment down below. Tell me who was responsible for Henry's murder and why. Give the video a thumbs up if you liked it, and have a great day.